You have to create training on a new software that your client's rolling out, but you grunt thinking at the idea of a boring point and click training? Well, don't worry, I've got you. I am actually on the path of almost 500, if not at 500 already, e-learns on software simulations. So I am here to give you my tips and tricks on how to create engaging software simulations. World of instructional design and e-learning development in January of 2009. And I have to say it was right after the economic crash, so I was just looking for a job, and I really wanted to find something in training if that was a possibility, but I was, didn't even think that could happen. And I finally found a job that would take me without experience and would train me, and it just so happened to be at a software company in the training department. So that was pretty interesting, because anybody that knows me knows that I'm not a big software person. All of that mumbo jumbo about software is just not my thing. But developing my skills in training, and I think just having fun, because I was training pharmaceutical reps who were pretty, sales reps are pretty fun and they're engaging. We created a cadence and I developed a style that was a little bit more engaging and fun. So as I started to create additional training online, I wanted to make sure that that same experience in the classroom translated to online. So making sure that we were doing things that were engaging and fun was definitely something that was important to me, and I think is still important. Just because it's software doesn't mean it has to be boring. Just like if it's compliance doesn't mean compliance training has to be boring either. So I'm here to give you some tips and tricks about how I've been creating engaging software simulations. So first things first, what is a software simulation? And it's the idea of taking the tool and being able, through the use of screenshots or actually recording the software, create tasks and videos of yourself completing the tasks, or giving the students the ability to play around in the system for themselves without actually being in the actual environment. And that's something that's so important to a lot of my clients, because they really want to make sure that their students feel prepared, but they don't want them to mess around with their live data. And they don't always have the ability to have a training sandbox or something like that in a training environment for their students to practice in. So they really lean on creating real life software simulations and real life software training so that their students feel prepared as they go into the field and use their systems. So first things first, what tool can you use to create software simulations? And there are so many. Typically for myself, I've used 3 in my career. First was Camtasia, and that was at my first job, and that was my first introduction to e-learning, and I hated using Camtasia at that time. It just wasn't really my thing, and I also was the voice for our e-learn, so I didn't always want to edit my voice, and I just found that for what we needed it to do, it was a little bit cumbersome. So we had someone on the team that was awesome at Camtasia and awesome at development, so I just kind of let him take the reins on that. I did the voiceover, and I was worried more about training in the classroom. What a dream that is, considering now there's no in-person training. Anyway, so that was really my reins and my specialty. So I really kind of honed down on that. But then he ended up leaving the company, and I needed to buck up and learn how to do the e-learning, or else we were not going to have e-learning. So we actually at that time also switched tools to Adobe Captivate, and that made total sense to me. I understood it. I understood the capabilities, and it was just easy for what we needed to accomplish that. So try again layers, hint buttons, some demos, some interaction, like all of those things were able to be easily done using Adobe Captivate. And that's funny for me to say now, because if you know me now, I don't want to touch Captivate with a 10-foot pole. And if I see a project that needs to they really want to use Captivate, I really have to think about whether or not I want to take on that project, because I just don't spend enough time in it. And I find that not a lot of our clients really want to spend time in Captivate, and most clients are actually using Articulate, and that's where I spend all day, every day, it feels like. And Once I went from Captivate to Articulate, everything just kind of made even more sense. It was easier. Putting together interactions or triggers, as Articulate calls it, made a ton of sense to me. So you have a few different tools and a few different options. I know Lectora is an option, although I don't feel like a lot of people really use that as much. And there are a ton of other options to create software simulations, so I can only speak to the ones that I've used and my experience with it. But out of the three, Articulate Storyline is the one that has proven to be the most useful for myself and has been the one that I've been most comfortable with, because using something like Articulate Storyline has been the easiest to use, the most intuitive, and has proven to be the fastest for what we're trying to do with, our software simulations. And a lot of what my clients have asked for is the ability to give students tasks and have them complete it. Give them the ability to explore and take a tour of the software and things like that. So those are all things that can be accomplished in Storyline. So I'm not sitting here and saying that you have to use it, because I know it is extensive, but it is something that I know they're asking for, and it has just proven for me to be the most effective. So when you create your engaging software simulations, I want you to think about a couple of things. One, let learners take control. It is so important to let adults be adults and allow them to explore and give them the ability to do that. So a lot of times I will either let the students explore from the beginning and say, these are the topics that are in the training, and I want you to pick and choose where you want to start. I would say 9 times out of 10, if I had to guess, they're probably going to go in order. But if you give them the ability to make that decision for themselves, it is, treating them like adults. And if they want to start at the end and work themselves to the beginning, well, that's their prerogative too. And I think for the most part, they'll grasp the concept no matter where they start. And sometimes they just want to pick and go into a topic that really pertains to their role in the task, and not exactly the entire, they don't really need like the nuts and the bolts. I also just think that navigation and that beginning part of almost every training and every software training at this point, where you're introducing the interface, doesn't always have to be as boring or as non-engaging as, here's the menu bar, here's, where your tasks live, if it's highlighted, that means it's the tab that you're on. Like, we are in software all day, every day. It's a virtual world, even more than it was before. So give your students that ability and that respect to know that they know that if a tab is highlighted in orange, then they're probably in it. Or if they hover over a link and it turns a different color, it's a clickable link. Like, I cannot tell you how many people have written that into their storyboards that I've received, and I'm just like, really? They understand? We're all adults and we're all intelligent people. They can figure out that if they hover over something and the mouse turns different or the color turns different, it's probably clickable. Or, shocker, they might click it and explore for themselves and see what happens. But yeah, you'd be surprised what you see in some storyboards that have been received. So treat your students like adults, let them explore, and understand that they are coming in with a pretty basic understanding of how technology works, so you don't have to explain every nook and cranny. Really, your goal is to get down to business. What is it that they're going to need to do in the system, and how is it going to help them either do their job better or accomplish their task or their job. Just get to that and get to that point to make it actually engaging, and it'll cut down a lot of time. I think that sometimes when we dive into the navigation of things when it's really not a complex system or not a new system to these students, then you're just wasting their time and they automatically get turned off from the training, because so often they're just like sitting there like, okay, yes, I know that's a menu bar, shocking, where you could actually give them information that they need. And that's something that would cut time and increase engagement. So one thing that we'll see often in training or interactive software simulations is this notion of you have to have a demo, you have to have a try it mode, and then you have to have a mode where they are tested. And I don't really believe in that. I think that you can definitely mix that demo and that try it into one mode, and then have the ability at the end or wherever you would like after each section or something like that to assess the learner and allow them to practice for themselves and have that test-it mood. Last year I created training for one of my clients, and this was their third phase of training. They had already done 2 phases with another company, and the feedback they had received from the first 2 phases is that their training was very repetitive and boring. And when I went back and I looked at phases 1 and 2, so I knew what not to do in phase 3, they had this cadence of demoing it, then trying it, and then testing it, and it was all the same scenario. So it was truly super boring for the learners, and truly was repetitive. And I understand the concept of demo, try it, and test, but I just feel like that, number one, the scenarios need to be different that you're providing to the student, and the tasks. While the steps to complete the task may be the same, you do want to introduce scenarios or different tasks as much as possible, but you could mix up demo and try it. So what you'll see in a lot of the training that I've done is that we mix it. So depending on, what we're training on, we might start off where we're actually clicking through and doing it and doing the task ourselves. But then when there's something that is important, so we want you to remember that in order to get to a workflow, you have to click on this button, or in order to start, to start the workflow, you need to click on the start button or whatever the button may be named. Those are the things that we want, that we'll usually ask the student to do, as opposed to having, the animated mouse come in and do the task for them. So that's kind of a way that we mix demo and try it modes, and it's been proven pretty successful, and it is engaging. It's different. It keeps the learners on their toes because they don't know exactly what's going to come next. And it makes sure that they're sitting there and paying attention. So often I've heard that people will just let training run, like they'll turn it on and they'll walk away until they get to the end where they need to take a quiz or exit out or anything like that. At least if we're engaging them throughout the training, then they're gonna sit there, they're going to pay attention until they get to the end. They may try to walk away, but then when they come back and they realize that it's stuck at a certain point, they're gonna realize they have to sit there and pay attention. To sum it up, throughout your software simulation, you want to keep it interactive. And interaction is not the next button, so keeping that in mind. Interaction is actually putting them in an environment where they're able to use the software, they're able to engage with it, and they're able to accomplish a task or complete the task on their own, so they can understand how they're going to use the system when they go out into the real world and they actually get their first task, or they have to use the software for the first time. So often, people think of, if you have the next button, at least they're engaging with something and they're going to pay attention to the training, and that's just not true. They're going to sit there and wait till the seek bar gets to the end and the next button is enabled, or they're just going to click through next if you didn't lock that next button down. So they're just gonna, try to accomplish that training and as fast as possible, and they're just not going to pay attention, unfortunately. Outside of just interaction, there is another way that you can engage your learners, and that is through chunking up content. So by chunking up your content into digestible pieces, it makes the content something that they can actually retain, and they don't feel that information overload. So I really recommend keeping software training to anywhere from 5 to 15, maybe 20 minutes, and that's really pushing it. What I found is if you can chunk up your content a little bit more, you can create learning paths wherever you're hosting your learning, so that students that maybe don't participate in part of the process don't have to take part of a training that does not apply to them. You can rearrange the curriculum depending on what kind of training or what kind of curriculum you're looking for, whether you're developing a refresher curriculum or something like that. And it allows you to look at each piece of the puzzle or each piece of the training or the software tasks separately, so you could see where students are excelling and where they're having some trouble, and you could assess, okay, they're having trouble in this module where they're completing this task. Maybe we need to assess what is it about this task that students are having trouble with. Is it the process is clunky? Is it that we didn't explain it well in the training, or do they need supplemental training when they are in the moment, or a supplemental job aid or infographic so that they can complete the task successfully? So those are some of the things that you can pull out of that information when you chunk up your content. Another nice thing is that if you take assessments out of the actual learning curriculum and develop a separate module of just the assessment, you can then use those assessments for refresher training or recertification and things like that. So I had a client where we had a module that was about that process or about that task, and they were able to engage with it. They had their chance to try it. And then we took the assessment and we created a separate file and loaded that to the LMS. So they would take the informative one and then they would take the assessment. And then what we did was we gave our client the ability or the recommendation that they took to then take that assessment and periodically, whatever cadence that they needed for their own training or for their own requirements, to push just the assessment back out to their learners and see how they did. And so they were able to see which students were completing the task successfully and were passing, so they didn't have to retake any curriculum. But for the students that were not completing successfully at whatever was their mark of success, they were able to then push out the informative module and said, hey, we saw you were struggling with this training. Here's the training, the module that gives you the breakdown of how to complete this task. Maybe you want to take a minute to retry or rewatch that training and then retake the assessment again. So it was a way for them to figure out, to gauge more about where their learners needed some additional assistance, who needed that assistance, and they were able to then create additional supplementary training or take a look at their process to see if there are some changes that needed to be made or some streamlining. So throughout this training or throughout this video, I talked a lot about using scenarios and real life examples that you can pull from your SMEs and pull from your help desk and things like that to find out what is it that the students are the learners are asking about, so that you know what type of training to put or what type of scenarios to put into your content. I cannot stress that real life scenarios and our scenario-based training, as some call it, and the use of storytelling are just critical to creating engaging learning. Students are more likely to remember things if they're told in some sort of story or some sort of scenario where they have to critically think. They're not just pointing and clicking and saying, okay, so in order to complete this review task, I need to click here, there, and there. They're not going to retain that. But if you give them a story or scenario where they actually have to figure it out for themselves, they are going to retain that information a lot faster and a lot easier. Through storytelling, you're giving the students the ability to relate to the content and think about their own past experiences and their own stories. And if you're relaying a story about how this particular task is completed in half of the time because they're using this new system, well, that student's going to recall how long it takes them now to complete the task and make them a little bit more excited or engaged with the training because they want to complete it to get maybe access to the software, so they can cut their time in half and they could have that extra time back to spend with their family or probably another task they have to do. Another benefit for storytelling is that stories are going to give meaning to data. You can throw data and numbers at your students or at your learners, but through the use of storytelling and interweaving that data within that story, your learners are able to relate better to the content. Looking at a number on the screen and kind of seeing, or looking at a graph and seeing maybe kind of how it relates to them isn't going to engage them like putting it into a story. So I think that through the use of storytelling, chunking up your content, scenarios, and letting the learners explore, you're giving them the ability to engage more with your training. So they don't look at software simulations or software training as something that's boring. And just making sure that you are sounding excited and your language and the voiceover that you're using in your training sounds fun, and doesn't mean that they need to be super cheerleader when they're going through the training and they're going through the narration, but don't speak in this tone so your students won't fall asleep. So if you look like you're having fun with the training, even though they can't see you, the students are going to actually perk up and they are going to engage more with your training. So are you looking for more tips and tricks to create better software simulations? Well, click the link in my bio to join my free Facebook group where we talk about all the things related to freelance L&D, including tips to creating a more engaging training. Thank you so much for watching my video, friends, and I will see you next week. Bye.